Over the last few videos I've been showing you how Bobby Fischer was playing at the start of 1970 when he'd returned to the chess world after a layoff of about 18 months, and he certainly hit the ground running, as we've seen. But now I'd like to turn to Boris Spassky and what he was doing at that time. Of course, he was world champion. He'd defeated Petrosian in 1969, and actually in 1970 he was also in pretty good form. We've already seen a beautiful game that he played against Larsen in the Soviet Union against the rest of the world match, although actually he only drew with Larsen 1.5, 1.5. But this is a little bit later on. This is from a tournament in July, played in Amsterdam. A tournament that he won with 11.5 out of 15, good score, equal first with Lev Pologievsky, also from the Soviet Union. And I'd like to show you this game against Grandmaster Ciric from Yugoslavia. Spassky with white, and he plays a very orthodox opening. It's a Catalan, we'll see in a second. There we go, the bishop fianchettos, and everything is absolutely normal here. Of course, black can take on c4, but instead Ciric goes for one of the closed lines. And instead of the most direct way to play, which is like this, to get in e4 immediately, then instead Spassky just wants to get his pieces out before he goes for anything. So just very calm development. Certainly can't be wrong just to bring all your pieces into the game. But also Spassky appreciates that black's position is still a little bit difficult. Although these moves look rather tame, in fact there is a good point to playing like this. The whole point of white's play is that his queen has a safe square on e2, and he's managed to connect the rooks. So white's threat, if you want to call it that, is to put the rook to d1 opposite the queen. Black's queen, on the other hand, does not have an easy time in this position. Of course, you'd like to go to e7, but the bishop stands there. You need to connect the rooks. With the rook on d1 opposite the queen, there are always going to be tactical problems for black. Putting the queen to c7, well, it's possible, but you don't really want to put the queen in front of the rook, and it'll inevitably have to go back to b8. Let me show you another game just very briefly that shows the kind of difficulty that black can get in. So this is a game between Keresh and Kotov, played in the Zurich 53 Candidates tournament, and Kotov tried to get out of his difficulties like this. So he's connected the rooks here by playing queen d7. But after this, white already had a very dangerous initiative, and those knights superbly placed. So let's go back. So that's why Ciric played here rook c7, absolutely typical move for these kind of positions, allowing the queen to move along the back rank behind the rook to either c8 or a8. Spassky exchanged on d5. Now, a bit of a dilemma for black. You could recapture with the pawns. Now, normally, I certainly don't mind playing with hanging pawns, this kind of pawn structure. But after this, black's pieces are a little bit awkwardly placed, and there's certainly no chance of an initiative against white's king here. White's pieces are beautifully placed. So I can understand why Ciric declined to do that. Instead, he played bishop takes d5. And now Spassky seizes the initiative. There's no messing around. The pawn drives forward to e5, and of course that gains space for white. The disadvantage is that black now has a very nice square for the knight on d5. So white really needs to exploit this space advantage. Otherwise black will be fine here. Black's next moves are going to be queen here, possibly rook to the c-file, and with this knight on d5, Black could be very well placed. So Spassky reacts very quickly, and what he does is throw the knight into d6. Obviously Black can't live with this knight, this has to be exchanged off. Now, is that pawn a strength or a weakness? Ciric goes to take it straight away. And it's difficult for White to hold on to that. So Spassky is prepared to sacrifice a pawn. And, well, let's see what he's got for it. It's a very, very interesting position. Spassky exchanges on c5. And here, well, a little tactic. Of course, we would like to keep the pawn structure intact and recapture with the knight. But then knight g5 shows one of the ideas behind playing knight d6. You can see this diagonal has opened. So this one is also open. The queen is very free. Lots of possibilities for the queen, can sometimes come out here. This is extremely dangerous because these squares are now vulnerable and the queen is way across the other side of the board. What happens if rook takes pawn? This, of course, is critical. Well, a typical tactic here, the best that White has here, is to take and play queen e5, threatening mate and threatening the rook on d6, and that wins. Therefore, Ciric recapture with the pawn. That means the knight is still covering the e5 square, so he's intent on taking that pawn, and he still has a nice knight in the middle of the board. So knight g5 from Spassky, and rook takes pawn. So Ciric has his pawn, and now the question is, can Spassky drum up enough attack in this position? Those bishops look fantastic. The knight is menacing, as in the previous variation. Those pawns are certainly vulnerable, and White has beautifully placed pieces that rooks can come into the game. Simple move from Spassky. He doesn't push things here. Simply rook d1. I really like this move. It just shows such coolness in this position. And here Ciric played rook a6. An unusual move, but this knight is loose in the middle of the board. Perhaps he was just preempting. The rook is loose in the middle of the board. Perhaps he was preempting the knight coming to e4. Okay, let's see what happens if h6. This looks like a normal move, and this shows the kind of compensation that White has. So rook c6, hanging onto the pawn, and now queen g4. Let's just attack g7. And after f6, you can see that the pawn on e6 is weakened. This is not a joyous position for Black to play. Lots of pressure here, pressure here. Bishop a3, pressure here. So f5, the queen comes back. White has fantastic compensation for the pawn in this position. Beautiful harmony in his pieces. But okay, instead of h6, Ciric played rook a6. As I said, I understand it. It preempts the knight coming back, and he hopes to gain a little bit of time, but it looks a little bit odd. It looks loose. Of course, the rook is protected by the bishop. Nevertheless, it feels a bit funny to play like this. And in fact, Spassky played here queen e4, which is a strong move. In fact, he could have won straight away with knight takes pawn. But this is tricky. It could well be that he got to a certain point in his calculation and couldn't quite see it through. But let me show you this anyway. This is very straightforward. This instead of a double bishop sacrifice, it's a sacrifice of a knight and a bishop. But we've seen this before. Well, the idea is clear. This, if any of you know the classic game Lasker Bauer, then you'll recognize this and mate. But here black can struggle on with the move f5, and it's not absolutely crystal clear. It's very, very good. In fact, white is winning this with, I mean, this, of course, this is a computer variation, but this is very strong. And queen h7, but this is absolutely not obvious, and even this is, the variation goes on and on. It's really not clear. So I suspect that Spassky just thought, can't see my way through that, and instead he played something strong, sensible, holding all the advantages in his position. With queen e4, he's basically provoking another weakness in black's position. g6 is too ugly. Knight f6 doesn't protect this because we have bishop takes knight, and if knight takes, then the bishop is on prise. So black is forced to play f5, a really ugly move, weakening e6, weakening squares towards the king. Queen c4, so simple and pragmatic from Spassky. Black is in deep trouble here. Let me just show you one really nice variation. What about rook e8 to protect this pawn? Well, this move, b4, is really strong. It's very strong. Let me see. Well, obviously, knight takes is met by rook takes. And pawn takes, this is really nice. Bishop takes knight. Now bishop takes bishop can be met by queen takes rook, so pawn takes, and queen f4. Very simple moves, but it gives white a completely winning position. So threat number one is to play queen takes pawn, attacking knight, attacking the pawn on h7, and it's very difficult to defend against this. So for example, knight f6. Well, let's move the rook in. And this is absolutely fatal. White's initiative is just way too strong. Or if rook c6, well, this makes no odds. We exchange and just take on f5, and this is winning. So the combination of these pieces is absolutely deadly. And if h6, well, we keep going. Takes here, threatening mate, and rook c7, and white is going to break through on this square shortly. So a very difficult position for black indeed. Ciric played queen e8. I think a logical move, trying to bring the queen over to protect the king and protecting the pawn on e6. Rook e1, attacking the weakness. And if h6, then we can just take on e6 anyway, and the pin is fatal. White isn't even material down in this position. Rook e3 followed by doubling on the e file. Whoops, I misfired. Ciric took on a2, but this is desperation. I think he will have appreciated that he's lost in this position, and the finish is really nice. So rook takes, attacking the queen and undermining the knight. So the queen goes in the corner to maintain protection. And Spassky finishes very efficiently and just moving the queen across, attacking h7. And h6, I'm afraid, isn't terribly good. Well, there's simply no defense. Queen takes pawn, and if pawn takes queen, then rook g6 is mate. Otherwise, queen h7 mate is threatened, queen g7 is threatened as well. Black played knight f6, but rook takes finish things off. So pawn takes queen, rook g6 is still mate, and otherwise after rook takes, well, this is one possible winning line. And this, of course, is an utter rout. Well, we may as well go all the way to checkmate just to satisfy everyone. And there we go. I think this game shows, well, Spassky's feel for the initiative, that's one thing. And that he had a superb instinct for the attack, actually. If you look through Spassky's games, you'll find quite a few games where he plays a really direct attack. If you contrast that with Fischer, he was beating, smashing players in the tournaments he played, but strategically outplaying them in the middle game, in the end game. Whereas Spassky, he will often defeat players in this manner with a beautiful attack. So as I said, Spassky also in tremendous form in 1970. He won that tournament equal first with Polagevsky with 11.5 out of 15. In the next video, I'm going to show you how Fischer was playing at exactly the same time in Buenos Aires. The tournaments were played right in roughly the same dates. Tell me what you think of this video. Please do like, comment and share, and if you're not a subscriber, then do hit the subscribe button. It's free to subscribe, of course, and if you want instant notification, please hit the bell as well. You can check out the playlists of these players, of Spassky and Fischer as well. Again, you'll see that in the video description, and thanks for watching.